Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to today's conversation. I'm Sara Jane, and my co-host is Enolia. Welcome, Enolia.
Hello, hello, hello.
And our guest tonight, because it's night here in England, is Mary Wolken. Mary, thank you so much for joining us.
Definitely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. And our topic for this program is trauma, the hidden dragon. Now, I know what you mean by the word dragon. I just don't like using it because of my dragons. But I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And obviously, trauma is something that we have become more. Oops, don't worry about Enolia dropping in and out. Sometimes the connection happens, Mary. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Trauma is something that people are becoming more and more aware of, conscious of, and the effects that it can have on people of all ages. And I know that this is something you feel very strongly about. Well, I do. I think a lot of us that are aware of it and have become aware of the trauma in our own lives realize just how important it is for us to work with it so that we can do as much as we can to heal it, for us to have as normal a life as possible, whatever normal might be for you. So, Mary, share a little, because it's hidden in plain sight within our body, tissue and organs, because it affects every aspect of us. So do you want to share a little of why you feel this is so important? And then we'll sort of go round and sort of all of us will share.
Well, I've been involved in trauma work since I was 7 years old. My mother took me aside one day. I was in Brownies, our scout troop, and she was one of the leaders. And she took me aside one day and she said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Well, my mother, being a strong Irish Catholic, never talked to me like that. She'd say, "Come here," but not inviting me in like this. So she had my attention to begin with. And she said, "I'm going to ask you if you want to learn how to do something that could help one of the other scout leaders. But you can say no if you want." Well, now I was totally intrigued by what was going on. And she said, "This woman has a health condition and you can't catch it, but there may come a time when I would be gone and you might be the only one that would know how to take care of her." She says, "But you don't have to say yes." Well, I already had that scientific curiosity and I couldn't imagine saying no. So I said yes. And so she taught me how to take care of someone that was having an epileptic seizure. Not only to take care of her, but to take care of the crowd, to move things out of the way for safety's sake and all this kind of stuff, and to be able to assure people that everything would be fine. Well, apparently I learned well, because this is 7 years old now. 4 months later, there was a day when she wasn't there, and this woman had a seizure. And I was the only one of all the adults and kids there that knew how to take care of the crisis. And I was hooked. I just loved this kind of work where you were needed on the spot and you could do something to make things safe and better. So that's how I got into emergency care. And as I grew, I took more and more first aid, ended up taking enough EMT training, emergency medicine training, that I could ride ambulances and take care of things that way. But at the same time, I was going through the technical end in school. I was going through my master's and into my PhD in integrated medicine, that I would call it now, but it was cell research. And I was fascinated by cells and how they seem to be able to communicate with each other without us teaching them how to do it, and how we didn't seem to know how to do that. And I mean, I was just totally, and the question came up, where does this come from? How do they communicate? What drives this? And that became the basis for me then getting involved in energetic medicines, even though I applied to medical school, not ending up going to medical school, because I got told in more than one way that that wasn't the kind of medicine that I was going to practice. And then the training, then the homeopathy, kinesiology, et cetera, and herbs that I took since then to help realign this thing. And it took till about, maybe 7 years ago, actually, after doing this for about 40, to find out how this communication actually happens. And I was listening to Chopra and some of his cronies one day on a YouTube video, and they always love to give him a hard time. I mean, they think he's a little strange, so they just really ride him, even on the videos. And so this particular day he was speaking, but one of his colleagues that was speaking happened to be an advanced researcher in light work. And he said he had something exciting to share. That within that year, they think they had found the answer to where the universe began. Oh, well, now they had me for sure. And so when he got up to talk, he held up 2 pictures. They both look similar, very similar. One was a picture of neurons firing in the brain. And the other one that looked really similar to it, he said, was one of the pictures that they had just taken of the energy from the center of the black hole. It was at the center of our universe. And I just went, whoa, this is unbelievable. So now many things made sense, that it all came from light. And through the darkness, the light came. That's why it affirmed all the Bibles in the world. They said, and then there was light, and we all took that for granted. We didn't know what that meant. Now I could see what that meant. And that was the essence of how everything communicated in cells, was on some form of light vibration. All healing took place on that level. All pain and trauma happened because that's been constricted some ways or multiple ways. And then not only is it constricted for that particular time, depending on the depth of the trauma and the length of it, that it is then passed generationally.
Yeah.
And that, we have inherited what we haven't inherited in our genes, they may get just in the birthing trauma alone. I had somebody just recently, and I was telling my son about this, who's really into energetics, and one of my long-term clients and a friend of his actually had just given birth for the first time at 40. And it wasn't a quick and slick delivery system. So she went through the midwives, had hoped to do it with water birthing. That wasn't happening. So they took her to this flat table, and she told me that they put a balloon in her and then put the TV monitors on. I said, what did they put a balloon in there? So that they would know when she was constricted enough that the balloon would then shoot out. I thought, what happened to measurements, from days gone by? And then why were you in such an uncomfortable position while this labor is progressing? Because they wanted to make sure they could see the baby. So you were causing trauma just in the process of trying to get perfect pictures. And my son's comment to the whole thing was, that was clearly designed by a man, not a woman. There's no woman alive that would have devised that kind of a system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would sort of share. So thank you for sharing all of that. And we will definitely be coming back to you. Enolia, your thoughts on what Mary has said, and anything that you'd like to share in respect of trauma.
Well, Mary talked about when trauma was introduced in her life. And so Mary, it's so funny the way that you said you were 7 years old. So for me, since I can remember, trauma has always been there, because first of all, my mom and dad, my mom was born in 1921, my dad 1919, right?
Wow.
So during that time coming up in the US, I don't even have to talk to what the US was going through in terms of trauma in the environment. But my mom was a registered nurse. She was the first nurse that graduated Grady Hospital in the South. And she was the first Black nursing unit. So
wow.
When I was born, you know, all I remember was sitting around hearing the stories my mom went through in terms of saving people's lives. She started out in pediatrics, ended up in ICU. And so the storytelling of people's lives, what they went through, you know, she worked with a lot of people who dealt with pacemakers and everything. And she also worked in the emergency room. So, you know, I grew up where the people knocked on our door when someone was having a heart attack. And people knocked on our door if someone was choking, or knocked on our door to go get Nurse Harris because they needed them now. They didn't have enough time to get to the hospital or until the ambulance got there. And I was always right by her side. So I truly understand what you're talking about. And it's funny because I have a cousin who's an MD. I have a couple of cousins who are MD. My mom was a nurse. She should have been a doctor in her time. I mean, she was brilliant in that regard. And then I, you know, love the energetics, you know, so there we are with the full spectrum balance of having that conversation from the physical side and me looking at it from the energetic side, and really just going, you know, I see the complement of both to each other, you know, how things are passed down from lineage to lineage to lineage, how we bring it on from lineage to lineage to lineage too, not just in genetics, but sometimes our attitudes and how we've treated, how I was treated through my mother's mother was treating my mother treating me, and me learning energetically, okay, it's got to stop with me. And I've got to actually say it stops with me. Otherwise I'm going to pass it on to my sons, you know? So it's really, really something to deep dive into and look at 360 degrees, because no matter how you look at it, there's a truth of what needs to be done, what has to be approached, and how to work with it. It's so many different ways, you know, whenever you're dealing with trauma. But that trauma has to be dealt with, because if you don't deal with trauma, then you really are shaping your whole life based on suffering and pain, and looking through the eyes of pain and looking through the veil of pain as you grow. And that's not good. That's not good. We have to be able to deal with our trauma and deal with our pain so that we can potentially move through its story. It doesn't mean that we have to forget it. It doesn't mean we have to tuck it away like it doesn't exist. No, that's not what I'm saying. But move through our story of pain and deal with our pain so that we can move without seeing the rest of our life through painful eyes, if so to speak. So yes, it's unbelievable topic to me that everyone has to deal with, and the fact that everyone deals with pain a different way based on their belief systems, upbringing, and everything else, and backgrounds. There's a lot of work to be done, a ton of work to be done. So that's just my opening thoughts in terms of, you know, trauma. Yeah,
there is so much synchronicity here. My mother was a nurse, so was my grandmother. In fact, my grandmother had to give up nursing when she became married because married women couldn't work back then. Yes, so we're going back a long time. But my mother was doing her training, nursing training, when she met my dad. But it was obviously when she became pregnant with me that went out the window. But she went back to her nursing training many years later. And what was, they called a state enrolled nurse and a state registered nurse. The state registered nurse is the higher rating of the nursing that I'm sort of aware of. Okay, things may have changed again since then. So the training my mum was receiving when she met my dad was the equivalent of the SRN. When she went back to training, she went in at SEN, so state enrolled nurse. But that was the equivalent training she'd done with her SRN before. And now the doctors with it's seriously, it had moved on so much that the doctors training back then was the equivalent of SRN 30 odd years ago when she went back to training again, sort of 30, 40 years ago. But yes, there was that. So when the trauma occurred to me, the scolding occurred to me, Mum knew exactly what to do because of her nursing training. But I just love the synchronicity of the fact that we're all talking here about parents who knew what they're doing. Yes, obviously we'd hear from Mum, but we wouldn't hear so much because she'd been going through her training at the time. But then Grandma would tell her stories. Is it tracheotomy? So that's something to do with the throat. She had to actually give herself one. Yes, and that was my grandmother. Yeah, but all of this, I suppose she could have died if she hadn't done it.
Hi, George.
What do you do if you've got the skill? I went to St. John's Ambulance, and I never would have become a nurse, but I did training within first aid, etc. Because that's something that had come down the family. But yes, later life, it's about the energetics, about the energy, and realizing that you talked about the cells, Mary, and realizing that actually that hurt, that pain, that trauma is held at a cellular memory, at the cellular memory level. And that is something I have felt very strongly. Don't know how it works or rest. I didn't need to know how it worked. I was just very aware that it was at that level, because especially with people like myself, where the trauma happens very young, you don't have any actual memory of it. But that trauma is still sitting inside your body and affecting your life. So now that we've all sort of shared that actually there's in a way, yes, we're all coming from the same direction.
Well, yeah, I come from a medical family as well. My mom was a lab technician. My dad actually became an MD, but never practiced, and a lawyer as well. And doctors and nurses flood the family all over. So they thought that I fell off the wagon when I got into energetic medicine. They were sure. Well, not only that, the other trauma that went on, and this is what we're talking about, this ingrained trauma, is that after my folks married, I don't know how long after, but she got pregnant with my brother that was older than me. And she carried him to delivery day, and he died the day he was born. And she never saw him. My father helped bury him. And they desperately wanted a boy to replace that one that is now turned to sainthood in their book. And I can remember coming out of the womb, someone holding me, and them asking if I was a boy. And then having my father later on, when I was young, 7, 8, 9, whatever, and I was very much outgoing and wanted to learn some of the skills because he was now working for a pharmaceutical house. And him saying to me, he said, "It's really a pity you're not a boy, because I could teach you to be a hell of a salesperson." And, we know that has nothing to do with the sex that we are in this process. It's just how we view things. So that was how I got started. Then I went into this thing called medicine and research at a time when women, of course, were not supposed to be doing this. But I was offered a fellowship to go to graduate school. And my friend, who was a male at that time, had gotten his major professor interested, and they called me. And sure enough, I went to Arizona on scholarship. And then the rest is history, from there. But I was not trained in the energetics as we know energetic medicine, except I was very much in tune with nature and the nurture that comes with nature. And as a youngin', I came up staunch Catholic, and I was supposed to be the next nun in the family. So I was a disappointment on that score alone. But I would practice being a priest in my bedroom, even though, of course, in the Catholic Church, that was not okay to do those things. And so I was always involved in this energy stuff, some way or another, and always in tune with something else other than what was in front of me. So that by the time I got finished with my master's work and I wanted to take the cell research into medicine, I arrived for my interview at the medical school and put my hand on the door to go in for my interview. And this was a time when, you know, you could count on one hand or less the number of women that were in these classes. Put my hand on the door, and this very loud voice said, "Mary, why are you doing this? You know you will never practice this kind of medicine." Went, oh, took my hand off the door, turned around and went home and did 2 days of intense meditation. And I said, okay, if I'm not supposed to do that, make it so clear I can't miss it. This kind of thing. And within 2 weeks, I had an invitation to go hear this doctor that had come over from India. He was speaking on something I had never heard of. It was homeo something, and I only knew one homeo word in my whole life. And that wasn't what he was speaking on. And so he came and I interviewed with him, and he looked me in the eyes and he said, "You only have one path in this world." Says, "You are destined to be a homeopath or a doctor somehow of energy medicine. If you want to come to India and study there, I can make sure that you've got a place to stay and go to school there, Mexico City, or you could do it on your own with others in the States. But that's the only way. You have to go." Well, this, of course, was not a popular concept in my medical family. That witchcraft, anything to work with, you know. So I was always weird to them. In fact, it took until 15 years ago for one of my brothers to tell me that growing up, that's what they always called me, was Weird Mary. And they said, "You don't want to do that because Weird Mary will know." And, you know, no one ever told me that till then, you know, this kind of thing. But that trauma that started with that rejection at birth by sex, I had taken that and flipped it. So I had taken it, okay, well, there's not much I can do in my head about this thing called sex. So I'm going to dig in and prove to you that I can do it, by God, no matter what. And all the way through school, you know, people, even when I got out with my master's, people said, "How did you ever get through school with the attitude they had towards women? Weren't they always on your case?" I said, "No, not really." I said, when, you know, upsets came, I had people that defended me. I said, "That's amazing." But that's how, when it is your destiny and the universe is protecting you, so to speak, you know, it's not that it was quick and easy sailing, but I also wasn't, you know, hung in effigy outside or any of that stuff either. So it's, so that can be, and from the work that I've done, if you take that one step further, the work that I've done with many clients is to take them beyond this life's trauma and actually regress back into past lives. Because there's sometimes that they could not figure out, nothing showed in their world of why they should either respond or have something that acts up in whatever way it was. And so we would do regressive therapy on them and find out how far back it went, what was happening, so they could then forgive and release what was going on so they could finally heal. But all of that was coming forward.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Enolia.
I'm sitting here listening to Mary's story and how, you know, you work through, and it's funny because it's like there's many roads to the one. You were destined for energetic medicine, and I really, really commiserate with that whole idea because, you know, I had went to Chicago. My cousin's a doctor, and so I was while she was in med school, I think she was her second or third year residency. They had this program to expose high school students to all areas of doctoring, and I went, and, you know, I got to participate in everything, and, you know, everything was fine. I could deal with the different aspects of medicine, and, you know, I could deal with the cadavers, and I could deal with this, that, and the other. But when it came to just the actual open heart surgery and stuff, it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. You know, that was the tipping point. You know, all of the areas I could deal with, the geriatrics, I could deal with the pediatrics, I could deal with childbirth, I could deal with this, and this. But, you know, the surgery just was the push over the top for me. And it was just like, okay, so that's not what I'm going to get involved in. And so here I am, I'm a math major, you know, I designed computer networks, and I went that whole area of it. And it's so funny that it was 3/4 into my career, you know, here I am 15 years into working in a Fortune 500 company, and I meet my first Indigenous elder grandmother. And, you know, under the auspices of wanting to learn my own, you know, background and my own traditions and everything, because I'm part Cherokee and Luya tribe African. And so I couldn't embrace the African traditions in the US, just had no idea where and how or who. And so in embracing the indigenous native traditions, the Indian traditions, I ended up learning energy medicine. And, you know, here it is. What is the likelihood of this IT trained, you know, network designer, you know, at a Fortune 500 company going to learn completely 360 degrees the opposite of all of the logic that you've been groomed to know, and so on and so forth. So needless to say, when I started down that path, the humility that had to take place, and the shift that had to take place, and the change of the viewpoint that had to take place was huge. It was a huge leap. It was a huge leap of basically either saying, I'm going to accept my path and accept what God is planted before me, and I'm going to make a commitment to it, or I'm going to throw it out the window completely and just basically say, I don't believe in this, you know? And so to be that odd person out, I get it. I was teased my whole life, you know, from my birthday being on Halloween to my middle name to, you know, it was just, and I truly believe that that's why we're the best at what we're the best at. Because when you're talking to that trauma patient, you're not coming from a place of a place that's not authentic. You're coming from a place of authenticity. You're coming from a place of, from birth, I've had to deal with this. So I understand exactly what pain you're talking about when you say I've been teased, or I've been ostracized, or I've been, you know, whatever that case may be. You've dealt with it firsthand on the front lines, had to move through that story, had to work. So you can talk from a compassionate point of view, a passionate point of view. And those things are so important. That's where the real healing comes from, because it's the person that can understand and understand that authentic place of what a person is feeling and what a person is going through, and that can hold space and hold that story and understand that story, and then help it to unravel so that it doesn't engulf and consume a person, is the most important thing. So it's interesting that I'm listening to the three of us, and each one of these is sharing the fact that to find our own empowerment, to be the best version of what we can be for what we do and how we approach things and how we do it, is that ostracizing, is that going through pain, is that going through trauma to prepare us. So what are your thoughts on that? And I'll turn it over to you.
What I would sort of say is, Yeah, I come at it slightly differently because, of course, I went through that trauma. I went through that people pleasing. I went through because the trauma so affected me and my ability for self-worth, self-love. I just had none of that. But it was the wake-up call. And that was caused by the medical profession. Dentist breaking my jaw. Yeah. And then the 6 months of pain and sleepless nights following the operation, etc. But it was that wake-up call, and then it was that coming to that understanding is, what can I do for me? It was about what I could do for me, and somehow I had that understanding that the deeper healing process was my journey. I wouldn't have put these words on it. Was my journey. It was what I could do for me because I was the only one who could help heal me. I was the only one who could do it. That's when I discovered the energy. That was my first introduction to the energy of Reiki. And so we've come at it all slightly differently, but I suppose what I would say to everybody listening, if you are already a practitioner of some sort with energy and never thought about the trauma that people go through and you work, because I didn't start with the trauma level for anybody else. And I don't think I'd realized I was working with the trauma level for me. But it's your story, it's your journey, it's your take one step at a time. And as you said, I think it was Enolia, we have to work through it. It isn't a matter of saying, oh, don't worry, it'll go away. And that is today what concerns me so much when I hear people say, children are resilient. And I think, please don't say that. They aren't. They have no idea how to deal with what's going on. So they bury it. And it goes into that deep cellular memory level. You know, if you like, I've seen our solar plexus as like a well that we put all the stuff we can't deal with in. And one day that lid's going to come off. And potentially things like strokes and heart attacks and cancer and other illnesses can be due to that stuff that we haven't dealt with. It's all in there, and it will say it's time to come out. That's my feeling. Now, you two may be able to say something different, but that is how I see it. And we can live a brand new normal, because the way I lived was my normal. It just wasn't a healthy normal. Now I feel it's a much healthier normal. So come back to you, Mary, because obviously some of the people that are listening are hoping that there's something that they can hold on to. The energy, we work with energy, we work with different forms of energy. Homeopathy, absolutely. I'd go to homeopath before I'd go to a doctor. That's me personally. It's obviously people exploring what works for them, what supports them to empower their own self-healing. So Mary, so we can actually sort of share something practical that people can do, because they know that we are now talking genuinely from our own experiences and from our own healing journeys.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say the good news. I mean, we've talked about the bad news. This is there, and it's held all over your body, depending on what your favorite organs and tissues are. And it may come out at the weirdest times, so I had one, I was teaching high school, and early morning, nothing had gone on the days before that would set me up for, some kind of a crisis. There was something or some action that this one boy did in the room, and there wasn't anything, directed to me or whatever, but man, did it trigger something inside of me. It triggered something so strong and I had already been involved in training programs to help get a hold of my energy. I had to go and face the blackboard and do some deep breathing and commit to myself that when I went home, I was going to do the processing of this. I didn't have time to do it now, but clearly it triggered something from my past that, you know, maybe his soul was involved in somehow from the past, but there was nothing he'd done that I needed to massacre him on the spot or anything like this, you know. But it was just way over the top of a reaction. So there are tools, and I train people all the time in how to use these tools in order for them to be able to heal body, mind, and soul, and to be able to stay centered in a crisis. They're easy to do because you do most of the training while you're asleep. So people like this kind of training. I used to have special classes in high school. I taught at an alternative high school where we were allowed to kind of go crazy. And so I had this self-healing program that I was teaching them as part of their science program. And in that program, the group learned how to, there's self-relaxation techniques and how to go in deeper into the mind than just the outer consciousness level. And that the deepest of those, the delta level, was decidedly used for healing. And that by learning how to access that level, you could heal your body, mind, and spirit without a problem. And so my really good students learned this thing well. And I always checked in with them to see how they were doing from one week to the next. And we had a couple of weeks we were off for Christmas holiday, and came back from Christmas holiday, and I just threw the question out to the group and said, and how's everybody? Did anybody have anything interesting happen over the holidays? And that was the cue to talk about your energetic things. And this one boy raised his hand and he goes, I did. I said, okay, you got the floor. And I had no idea what to expect. But they'd gone through the self-healing portion of this program, and besides the self-relaxation and all this. And he said, over the holidays, and this particular holiday in Tucson, where I'm from, it was a snowy holiday, which is very unusual. And it was ice and snow up on the mountain outside of the city. And so he then says that he rode his bicycle, because this was long before motorbikes or any of this, and no cell phones either. He rode his bike up the mountain and got partway up the mountain and skidded on a patch of ice and went over the guardrail with the bike. I go, oh my God. I looked at him, he's still here, thank God. And got up on the other side. He says, but the weirdest thing was when I got up, he said, I looked down and I could see my ribs. Oh my God. And I barely could get out. And then what did you do? And because I knew no cell phones. He said, I knew I needed to get help, but I wasn't bleeding and I wasn't in pain. Yes, he was in shock. There's no doubt about it. But he could think through the process rather than blank out like many do at that time. And so I said, what did you do? He said, well, I got back on my bike. I rode down the mountain and went into the ER. And now it's about 10 miles from where he was with his guts hanging out. And he said he walked into the emergency room, and he said the nurses and doctors freaked out because when I showed them what I wanted, they just froze in position. I said, so what did you do? He said, I knew I needed some help. And so I had to let go, he said, of something. So I said, what did you do? He said, I let go of the bleeding. So he let go, he started to bleed, then they could act, go into motion. And they sewed him up, but and he passed out, of course, because he was now out of shock. But 2 weeks later, as he's telling us about this, I'm glad it wasn't his parents telling us. And I said, can we see your war wound? And he said, yes. So he pulls up his shirt, and it looked like it had been healing for at least 6 weeks at that point in time. But that's how good we are if we're trained. And it's possible for anybody to learn how to take care of themselves in a crisis. and to use that to help themselves communicate more effectively, not only with their own body, but with each other, and to be able to work with the universe to get what you need and know what the universe needs from you without saying, oh, well, I didn't get this, and, you know, going that way instead. You can put yourself in alignment with your highest good much easier.
Yeah. Enolia, have you got anything you'd like to share?
I'm sitting here listening to Mary, and I guess what I would share is that mindset is everything. I mean, the bottom line is that you have to believe and trust that you're capable, that you can do it, that you can move forward, that you can handle it, and not go into that panic. Mindset is just everything. To see that end goal. And I was sitting there thinking about the moments that, you know, I had been put in trauma and I had to move through that story. And not even for myself. I remember that one time I was at home and was prepared to go to do my regular work day. And my ex-husband at the time put his arm through the storm door glass and severed his median nerve. And, you know, it only took seconds for him to say, you know, I'm like, are you okay? You know, he's wrapping something around. He wasn't even dressed. And it took him seconds to say, this is serious. You got to get me to a hospital. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, so I have a 3-month-old, I have a 2-year-old, and I just put them in. And I'm like on autopilot. I didn't think like panic. It was just like, okay, get pants on him. Got pants on him. You know, okay, tie something tight. Can you hold this tight? Press, press, press. Because my mother was that nurse. She had always worked with me. And then I'm like, get in the car. And so we're in the car, and then I'm moving, and we're literally only, you know, 10 minutes away from a hospital. But it's just like that mindset. Now I could have sat there and panicked and say, oh no, I better call an ambulance. Had I called an ambulance, he wouldn't have made it, you know? Moving through the streets, I got out, I saw a stranger in front of the hospital, and I'm like, I have a serious trauma here. You have to help me. I have 2 babies in the car. Please, can you get someone? They got someone, they took him. I took the kids to school. I doubled back. He was already in surgery.
Wow.
You know, because I couldn't have the babies there while he's being wheeled in and everything else. So it's unbelievable that if you don't have the mindset to just move through the trauma and whatnot, you freeze, you panic, and then you can lose everything. So mindset, and it's not to say pause in the reaction, but move through what that first initial reaction is that doesn't want you to move forward. So if I would offer anything, I would say that.
The thing I would add is to be able to do that, it's confidence and belief in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And how, especially if we've been adversely affected by trauma, there's an awful lot of us that don't have that faith and belief in ourselves. We really don't. And I suppose one of the ways, now you talk about breathing, absolutely, to sort of to calm, to bring you down. You can ground, you can put your roots down into the earth. That can really help stabilize you. But it's getting to that point of being able to do those things almost second nature. And it's obviously practice makes perfect. But one of the things that I have discovered is the importance of our name and how powerful our name is to connect with ourselves on many levels. So, and a lot of people don't like their name because of a lot of the things that we've all talked about. It's that energy of the hearing, the what are you doing? Why are you doing that? The telling off, you've got to do something. We're very good at as human beings to remember the negative things that have happened around our name rather than the love, the care that will have come at times, but we're good at remembering the negative. So my suggestion, and I make this to anybody that will listen, is start by just speaking your name to yourself. You are not asking anything of you. But as people say, look in the mirror, look yourself in the face, look yourself in the eyes, get to know yourself. Just allow yourself to speak your name over and over. So you are acknowledging yourself, because it's that power of self. For me, it's that power of self. And when you have the confidence built up, because I use toning, I use sound energy. So it's not singing, although some people may say it sounds like it. But when you've got the confidence, tone your name. Build up that beautiful energy of sound around your name. And it's helping people to reconnect with themselves and that power within them. That would be a suggestion I would make. So absolutely the breathing. And there are going to be loads of people that can tell you lots of different things. You can connect with Mary, you can connect with Enolia, you can connect with myself. But there are going to be lots of people out there who have found their own unique ways of things that work for them. Explore them, because we can all get through that trauma, and it can make us stronger. We are coming very close to the end of the program. Mary.
Yeah, before you go there, I want to add one other thing too, because I'm sitting here, and I know that we're sharing with the audience the different tips. One of the things that I just want to share is that remember that you have that connection to God. And there's going to be sometimes at that moment, that voice that's speaking to you that says, this is what you need to do. And to act on it and to know and to trust it is everything. Because sometimes, and it's happened to me too, that Spirit is talking to me through the trauma, talking me through the trauma, telling me what to do in the trauma, telling me how to approach it, telling me, okay, don't worry about this because I've got that taken care of. This is what I need you to do. Show up, be there, do this one task, and then everything will fall into place. You'll see, just trust it. And I don't want to forget that. I think that's crucial. And I know we're coming to an end. So I want to leave Mary with the last word to basically say, how can anyone in the audience reach you, reach out to you, get connected with you, to work with you?
They can reach me on Facebook, just with my name. They can go to the website, thehealthylivingcenter.com, or I'm sure that she's posted ways to get a hold as well, or email wise. And the other way that we naturally, I just wanted to touch base with getting in tune with spirit. The other way we normally do this that we don't consider is that whenever you're trying to figure out something, whether it's a math problem or which direction to go, you naturally raise your eyes slightly and relax your breathing. And when you get yourself in that state, you are tuning in on one of those deeper states of awareness so that the energy can flow through you and you will know the next step to take. Whether it makes any sense to your head or not, it doesn't matter. You just go with it.
Absolutely. Sara Jane, any last words?
Well, just to say that if you're watching the video on YouTube, I will make sure that the connection, the website, which I've just put up in the chat, the website for Mary is under the YouTube video, along with my own Enolia's. So please do get in touch. At the end of the day, we all wish to support. That's why we do these programs.
Exactly.
So absolutely. Mary, thank you for sharing with us. Thank you.
Yes, Mary, thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to have you here with us. And We'd like to share with you that on the next today's conversation, we're going to be excited to bring forward a young man. His name is Div, we call him, but it's Divesh Rikson. And he will be speaking about the systems of I am, the systems of I am. And that will be Wednesday, June 8th, 2022. And that will be 11:30 a.m. PST, 2:30 p.m. EST, and 7:30 p.m. on UK and Angola time.
Yeah,
so BST. So we want to thank you for joining us, and we want to just say thank you for coming. Namaste. Aho. Blessings to you all. See you next time. Thank
Namaste.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.